Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy podcast. My name is Wanaka Oberhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Hi.
Hi, good job pronouncing my name. A lot of people have trouble with that.
Happy to have you here, and you're a surprise guest, so people didn't know you would be coming on beforehand except for a short term, so this is great. And you've shared with me that you've been an avid student of A Course in Miracles since a long time, so we're going to go into that. But first, I'd like to ask you the big question, where you can expand in whatever way you feel like. How did you come to see the world the way you do today?
Ooh, that is a big question. I think the process actually started with my father, and he was a really astute student of human nature, and since he had dyslexia, he didn't read to us. He did teach himself how to read, but it was really difficult for him to read out loud. So he used movies and television to teach us to pay attention to other people and to assess why they were doing what they were doing. And that kind of started the process for me to pay attention to my own behavior. And he believed that the world was essentially a really great place, that the people who did quote unquote bad things were just wounded in some way. And so that's kind of been my outlook on life. I didn't really find A Course in Miracles until about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And but I had religious studies was my first major. I was always seeking the divine, how I could connect with the divine. I've had conversations with God since I was 8 years old or so. And so, it's just a process of growing and maturing. And even though it looks like things are really bad right now, I always seek out the positive things that are happening in the world. So, does that answer your question?
It certainly gives me some insight into your outlook on life, which is great. So let's go a little deeper into that. So this idea that the world is a great place, I think that's an important one, because in A Course in Miracles, it speaks of the world as a dream, and the way back home is through what the Course in Miracles calls the happy dream, right? So it looks like you started out in the happy dream. So you started out. Many of us didn't start out in the happy dream, but you did. So let's talk about that. What is that? This beautiful place you're living in. What are these thoughts that you were, and this understanding of people, and this recognizing that in A Course in Miracles, it would say that people who are acting out or doing things that are not so pleasant or whatever else, they're wounded. The Course in Miracles says they're calling for love. It's a call for love. What would you like to say about that?
Well, I have a couple of things that I'd like to say about that. One is, it always felt to me like this world that we were living in was, on some level, a kind of reality, but it wasn't the ultimate real reality. And then when I studied Shakespeare, and there's, of course, that very famous line about all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, I said, oh, yeah, okay, that's it. So I'm here on this planet, on this stage at the moment. And when I leave, I will be going to another reality. And there was another part to your question that I wanted to answer. Uh, Tell me what the other part of your question.
Sorry, the call for love.
Oh, yeah, the call for love. Well, my father always said, "Wounded people wound other people." And recently, I mean, I'm a theater teacher and I was an actor and a director, and I've done theater for about 45 years. So, but just recently, I went, "Oh, duh." Em- Stories can help us learn. It's just one way. A Course in Miracles is another way, but they stories can help us learn emotional intelligence, and it's the people who are not emotionally intelligent, the people who try to stuff their feelings, who don't want to embrace them because they think they're going to get stuck in the dark, that are the ones who perpetrate all these horrible things. And it's they don't see that there's another way of thinking, another way of being. They're just kind of stuck in their pain. Does that answer your question?
It certainly answers the question about um, what you do about it, right? Because you come from a different place. So yes, it answers the question in a way. And now let's go into you stated that you've been speaking with God since you were 8 years old. Would you like to describe what that is like, and how how does this speaking with God come about, and what does it feel like, and what do you hear, or what are the things that transpire there? What are your questions? You must be asking God things if you're speaking with God. So what's going on?
Well, it kind of manifests in different ways. There was one time when I was, my husband and I were attending the church that we had grown up in. And we had moved to Portland, Oregon, and we were attending church there. And I was teaching some religious type classes. And the pastor that we had at that time was highly conservative. And he came to me at the end of one class and said that I was wrong, my opinions were wrong, and that I needed to rethink the way I was teaching the class. And it was like, it was almost like this loud voice in my head that said, "You can stay and die or leave and live." Now, my husband and I had been considering leaving the church anyway. So, but that was this clear communication that, oh, I wanted something much larger for my spiritual life than I was going to be able to have if I stayed within the church. So, but other times it's just this quiet little feeling like, um, I was writing a novel, which I independently published in 2017, but I was writing this novel and I was kind of stuck on the story. And I had been to a writers group meeting, and we had a guest that day. And he said to me something that prompted, as I was driving home, I went, "Oh, I know where I need to go with," because I have two timelines. The person in the woman in the present, I was having trouble with her timeline, and I didn't know how I was going to connect the two timelines, how I was going to get her to communicate with her three times great grandmother in the past. And it all came to me as I was driving home. So it wasn't, I knew that it was, divine help, but it wasn't this big loud voice in my head. It was just this feeling that I had and this idea in my head. So it comes to me in different ways. Sometimes it's a really subtle thing, and I probably don't need it to be loud anymore because I recognize the subtle little ideas and voices, and it's always accompanied by some sort of physical feeling with the idea. Does that answer your question?
It certainly does, because it shows us that you've been fine tuning your ability to recognize the guidance and the conversation. Now, what I was, so and you also answered the question I had about what questions do you ask. In that case, you were asking about your story plot and how to develop that and what to do with it. So yes, it answers my question. So thank you for that. So now you said you've been in theater since 45 years. Now this is a really powerful thing. In anthropology, we like to use terms from theater when we describe rituals or religious happenings so that we don't get caught up in the discussion whether it's true or not. And so I think you might have some insights, having a interesting background in religious studies as well. How did you go deeper into discovery about other people's religious views and being open-minded about it, and then you had all the theater stories that gave you insights into it, into the human nature? I would love to hear how you went deeper with that.
When I was taking religious studies, it was in the 70s, and the church that I belonged to, only men could be ministers, and so I was the only woman taking that major. There were only about It was a small college, so there were only about 15 of us in that. But I did that major because I wanted to know how various people communicated with God or with the divine. And so studying world religions was really interesting to me because, gave me a little bit of insight about the Muslim tradition and how their rituals and how they communicated with God, and the Jewish rituals and how they communicated with God, and other religions too, Zoroastrianism, and I can't remember all of them. And so, and I realized that, we all have this desire, or most of us, I will say, have this desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves so that we don't feel so alone. And, but it's just where you're brought up in the world has something to do with it. The time period that you live in, um, your parents, and even your personality, maybe even your ego, if you want to call it that, have a say in, or an influence in what path you are drawn to. And there are no right or wrong paths. They're all good. It's just something where you feel like you are connected, maybe to a community or not. Some people don't need a community, or their community is really small. Like my husband and I practice Reiki. We've done that since 1991, and we have like 5 or 6 people that we don't all live in the same place, but every Sunday at 4 o'clock, we sit down and we have a half-hour Reiki circle where we send healing to various people that we know, or situations in the world, or to each other, whatever. And that is a really sacred time for all of us. Uh, So our circle is our, spiritual circle is kind of small, I think, uh, but everybody is going the same direction. It's just different flavors, like chocolate or vanilla or strawberry, or, you know, and none of them are wrong or all right. Uh, the religions that say, "Oh, we're the only way," I tend to stay away from those. Our church was a little bit like that, and that's partly why we left. It's not like that so much anymore, but because we still have family members that belong. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. It's Everybody has the reason they came here on the planet, and they connect to the religious tradition that speaks to them, or they, find the spiritual teachers that speak to them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to say all are valid, right? All paths are valid, and they all in the end lead to the insight that you need in order to continue your journey, right? Whatever that journey is. And so I think one of the things that you profit from when you're acting or directing or all these things on the stage or in movies, like you said, your father was teaching through movies. I think you are able to get into these different roles or think into them or imagine them, and you actually can say, wow, I can understand the motives, the actions, because I have some of it in myself as well, because you need to draw it from somewhere, right? So I think and it's another thing, I think it also allows you to open up to many things that might be difficult for people who don't go into these um, insights into other journeys. So, like opening up to this way that you're receiving guidance, right? I think you have some way of being able to shift into that guidance because of your willingness to move between roles, even in writing, right? Because when you're writing your stories, you also have these characters who are speaking and sharing their own journeys, right? So you're actually able to be part of it firsthand. So I think that that's a really important to talk about that. What role does acting, directing, theater play in this?
I think that I was actually guided to go there because, as I said, I was the only woman in the religious studies major at the time, and, there were a bunch of people who thought that I needed to change. They were men, who thought that I needed to change my major to something else, that I was never going to be a minister, and that it was wrong for me to think that I was going to be a minister in the church, which ironically, about 4 or 5 years after I graduated, the church started to ordain women ministers. But I was in this really horrible place because I was being assaulted at every meal by these guys, harassed, and some other things were happening to me as well. I was a little bit older student. I was 22 when I started college, and I was very open-minded, and it was appalling to me. I was shocked at how conservative all these younger people than me were, and very narrow-minded. And I grew up with parents who were very curious about the world. And so I was curious too. And so one, two things happened at the end of my second year at college. And one of my religious studies, it was the man that I was his faculty assistant. He said to me, I think you need to go buy a notebook and just start keeping a journal. And I had never done that before. So I took his advice. I went to the bookstore. I bought a notebook. It was just this, iron, what, like this kind of a notebook, nothing fancy. And uh, and I went home and I started writing. The second thing that happened was, while I was home that summer, I took two classes at the local community college where my mom and dad lived. And one of them was interpersonal communications. And it was taught by a theater instructor at the college. And he suggested that I try out for some plays. He said, I think you have an ability for, being in theater. So when I went back, I did. I got involved in the little theater, club, and started taking theater classes. And so I have a double major in my BA, and then I have a master's in theater as well. But I remember one day I was writing in my journal. I had been complaining about my lot in life and all these people who are harassing me. And finally, I just got tired of that. One day I wrote in my journal, what am I supposed to be learning from this? And immediately I got an answer. I got answers. Well, you're supposed to learn to love yourself. You're supposed to learn to accept who you are and why you're here on the planet. I mean, it was like, oh, oh, okay. So that was part, writing in my journal sometimes is how I get answers. That's another way I get answers is writing in my journal. But yes, you were right that as I started to get involved in theater, and the first play that I got cast in amazingly was a Shakespeare play, The Merchant of Venice. Uh, it was a baptism of fire because Shakespeare's difficult, usually for us Americans. And so, but the more roles that I played, I did realize you were right. I did realize that, oh, I have this little thing in me that I can use to play this character. The most difficult one for me, though, was when I was playing a pathological liar. I had a really hard time with that one. But most of the time, I could find something within me that would help me play the role. And so, yeah, I hope I've answered your question because sometimes I go off on a tangent and I forget what you asked. So let me know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think this drawing from what's within you to play a role is really important, and it's also the way to get answers. And I think that your journaling is a really beautiful way. I think that's something that is true for many people. They journal, they write, or whatever way they write and write whatever comes, and then suddenly something shifts, and then they start getting answers. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I think that's the same with acting, actually, because you start getting acquainted with the role and its characteristics and what it might have, and it takes a while. And then at some point you get this shift and you find this perfect thing within you, and things that you've observed that helps you, and suddenly you are that role, at least for knowing that you're not that role, but at least you are that role while you're playing it. And I think that's really beautiful. I love acting as well. I've acted too. And I think it's really important to recognize what depth an actor needs to go in order to play these roles properly, or to really get insights. And I think that helps in a spiritual journey as well. Because some people may think acting, okay, then you slip into these roles and then you're pretending things, like they might call it lying, right? If they don't understand acting, they think you're good at lying, right? Or that actors might use that to lie. But that I haven't had that experience. I don't know what yours is.
Well, I've never had anybody say that I was a liar, but I was directing Measure for Measure, and that's the Shakespeare play that has like the Me Too movement kind of sexual harassment kind of thing in it. And that was another interesting thing. I thought, I'd like to direct a Shakespeare play before I retire because I was getting close to retiring from. Now I'm fully retired from teaching at the college, but uh, and then I thought, well, I've never directed a Shakespeare play before. I'm not quite sure if I should do it. And then the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and I said, oh, okay, I have to do this. I have to direct this play. Well, then miraculously, I was contacted by a professional actor, and his father lives in Sierra Vista, near where I live, and that he travels around, he was traveling around the country directing or acting or stage managing professionally. And somebody that I knew him and said, you need to contact her. And so he contacted me. His name's Dave Dahl. And he he said, I have done this play 7 times. I have an adaptation that you can use, and I will be willing to help you. And so the play turned out really great because of his help. And now he's taken over all my classes, thank heaven. And yeah, oh dear, I'm so sorry. We've had this great collaboration. And uh, so, you know, directing, I always learn something about myself whenever I watch a movie, whenever I watch a television show, whenever I direct or act. It's just, I learn something about myself and about human nature. And it occurred to me the other day, this parent, when I was directing that play, said, "Well, it's not rocket science." And I thought, no. Recently, I thought, oh, yeah, I should have said to her, "No, it's not rocket science. It's more important than rocket science because it's teaching people to be emotionally intelligent." So,
Yeah, I love that. That's a point that is really important because many people, will see movies or books or so on as an escape, right? And you're saying it's actually the means to going deeper, and that's what I've been saying all my life as well. And many people, would like. I mean, I've also tended to the other view, which when I got uncertain of myself, but the depth of it is that it actually storytelling and playwriting and acting and all these things, singing songs, writing songs, performing, and art all have this amazing strength in it to draw out what's within us, to draw out this voice that comes from within. And I think that's a really important skill on the spiritual journey as well.
yeah, that's why I started my podcast, Story Power, because I wanted to get down to, why creators create what they do. And also I wanted to hear their personal stories as well, because every person's life is a library. And I realized that when I can't remember who said it, but when Chadwick Boseman died, I think it might have been the director of Black Panther, said a library died or was closed when he went. And so, and also I interviewed some people from Douglas, Arizona, who are part of the Douglas Oral History Project. And they just interview regular, everyday people from Douglas, and they're keeping a record of it. And they said every single person who comes in there says, "Oh, I don't have anything interesting. My life's not interesting." And then as they talk, the women's eyes are big because, oh my gosh, yes, their lives are so interesting. Everyone's life is so interesting. So, but most of us try to keep our emotions hidden. And I think that, oh, and we try to stuff them a lot of times. And I think that not dealing with your emotions has caused so many problems in the world for millennia. And because people are afraid. And uh, you know the ones who want to conquer the world and make it all, make Rome, everything in the world Roman, or whatever, uh, they're afraid. They want to control the world from outside them when they don't realize that they need to control the world inside them. And so, all the problems in the world come from unhealed emotions, I think. And uh, and there was one other thing I was going to say there, but I can't think of it. So ask me another question.
Previously, you mentioned that people are afraid of these things that they think are dark within them. And in the Course in Miracles says you'll be surprised that darkness isn't there, that you think is there, right? So I think that's what you're also speaking about.
Yes, that is what I'm speaking about. Yeah, because I mean, I know I stuffed my feelings for a long time, and then when I when I acknowledged them, I realized, oh, I was creating a lot of pain for myself, and I could carry a lot of pain, but I didn't need to, and that was way before I found A Course in Miracles. Uh, but I was reading Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra and uh, Greg Braden and uh, Gary Zukav and people like that, you know. So that's in fact, actually, the thing that woke me up was when I read The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck, and the very first line in there is, "Life is difficult." That's the very first sentence. And it was like, oh, yeah. And then he goes on to say, and we expect it to be easy. And it was like it made a flip in my head. I could go, oh yeah, life is difficult, but we don't have to see it that way. We can just accept it. Oh, okay, this is just a challenge, but it doesn't mean that I have to live here forever, you know. So
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge your experience, and A Course in Miracles is also saying, yes, it's crazy. The world is crazy the way you see it now, right? You really need to change your mind, otherwise you're going to continue experiencing the world as absolutely crazy, and and you'll be unhappy, right? And it won't feel like you're at home with yourself at all, right? Or in the world. So you do need to change your mind. And I think theater is one of the most powerful ways as well. Not the only, but it's one. And I think we can talk about that because we both love that. So let's go deeper into it.
well, yeah, that's you reminded me of what I was going to say. I've had some of the most profound experiences in the theater or watching a movie. And it's because it touches our emotions. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm going to mute myself for a minute and blow my nose.
This is so important that we reflect on what is within us and what is our deepest motivation. I think it's so beautiful. You're sharing your deep motivation, what got you into theater and what is still keeping you passionate about the whole theater movie and all the rest of it.
One of the things that I used to tell my students is it's the actor's job to help the audience feel what your character is feeling. And I'll never forget when I said that for the first time, one of my students said, "Oh my gosh, that is so profound. I never thought of it that way, but you're right." And so, you know, emotion, I think, is one of the most important things in our lives. It's we need to deal with our emotions. We need to feel our emotions. We need to let them teach us. Uh, Greg Braden is really big on that right now, and there are some other teachers that he associates with that are talking about emotions are more important than your thinking, but you need to link the two. You need to link your emotions to your thinking, and so that's another. I mean, that's part of A Course in Miracles too. I think is you don't deny your emotions, but link it to your thinking and allow yourself to see the world in a new way.
Yeah, I think A Course in Miracles does put thoughts first, I think. But the thing is that thoughts are expressed in words and words are removed, right? So I think we can safely say emotions might be another way of connecting with what is beyond the words, right? So yes, I would say it supports that in its own words.
Well, yeah, I think that actually our mind can't function on its own, because, I mean, we were given emotions for a reason. I don't want mean to contradict A Course in Miracles, but maybe in terms of thinking, it's it's thinking with your thoughts, it's thinking with your emotions. And together, those two things help you think critically about what's going on in your life, or why this person is yelling at you, or what's going on in the world. I mean, everything's been so topsy-turvy the last few years that some people's heads are spinning. But if you let your emotion if you deal with your emotions and then let them calm down, it's so much easier to hear the guidance that you're being given.
Yeah, and one of the teaching tools that is used, right, by the divine is contrast, and emotions certainly show us a lot of contrast. So yes, it's really helpful to be aware of what you're feeling, and it helps you be open to other people as well, to your siblings. I mean, in A Course in Miracles, it says we're all thinking with the same mind. So yes, it allows us to see that, to become aware that we are actually thinking with the same mind.
Well, thinking with the same mind, yeah. Thinking in terms of I feel what you feel. There was a study done that uh, I can't remember where I read this, but it was if we observe someone mistreating somebody else, it's as if it were being done to us, or the vice versa. If we observe that someone is being kind to someone else, it's as if it's being done to us. So that just shows you the connection, that we're all connected right there. That scientific, or maybe it was a psychological study. And yeah, so in the book uses the word thought, but I think that it implies both thought and feeling.
Yeah, I think it certainly is going very deep into these areas, because as we know, the scribe of A Course in Miracles and the co-scribe were both psychologists, so they knew about all of this, and so they were able to let messages come through that were very profound, and held all of that psychological knowledge. And so I think there's a lot to learn from that.
Well, and uh, I read the book, this was years and years, maybe 30 years ago. I read not Greg Braden, excuse me. I have read a bunch of his books, but I was thinking of Gary Zukav's book, Seat of the Soul. And the one thing that I remember from that book was that he said that for some reason humans decided when we came here that we were going to learn through crisis. And I think A Course in Miracles is trying to help us see that, oh, we don't have to do that anymore. In fact, I think Gary Zukov said we can decide to change that. We don't have to learn through crisis. And so books like A Course in Miracles are helping us see, oh, we don't have to have wake up in the morning and dread going to work, or oh my gosh, my life is so terrible. We can find joy. We can seek joy instead.
Yeah, I think that's important, that we get to that place where we can make that choice. And for that, a lot of cleansing is needed. And I think one of the cleansing charms that you were speaking of was through allowing emotions to come through. And one of the places where you can do that without feeling guilty at all is in acting. So yes, it's a beautiful way to allow those emotions to come through and not have to identify them as being who you are, because it isn't who we are. So actually actors get to realize that what they're acting isn't who they are. And so, but they might try to choose a role and say that's who they are. But then at some point they will realize, no, I'm not the role.
Exactly, yeah. And sometimes, unfortunately, like Heath Ledger got caught up in this role and he couldn't get out of it. He didn't know how to get out of it. So that's one thing that my teaching partner knows how to do. He knows how to help students get out of those. If they're playing a dark character or the scene is really dark, he knows how to help them get back to who they are instead of staying stuck in that dark place. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that um, we can learn so much from stories. Stories have been the tool for teaching since before the written language. And yeah, I think people who poo poo, oh, you're just reading a novel, uh, don't understand the power of story.
Yes, I'm absolutely on the same page with you about that. Yes, stories are so powerful. It goes beyond any anything you can imagine, because remember, we are telling stories every day. We're always defining who we are and the way we talk about ourselves and the things we do. It's always a story we're telling. Doesn't mean that we are the story, but the story is very, very useful in in remembering who we are. And that's why I think it's so important that my guests are able to share their stories in a teaching way, right? Because it is teaching us something. Every guest has something that they're teaching with their story, no matter whether they are totally aware of it or not. There's so much to learn.
Yeah, there is. Actually, I think there's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot to let go of. That we pick up all these silly ideas and yeah, so studying A Course in Miracles for me has been a lot of letting go of old stories that really aren't valid anymore or never were valid, but I thought they were.
Yeah, I think that's a core teaching in A Course in Miracles, is to forget the story, right? It doesn't mean that when you are called to teach or to share, that these stories don't come back for teaching purposes, but they no longer have that charge, perhaps, or they become something else, because in the sharing, spirit is able to come through and share a deeper level that you have not been aware of before, perhaps. Right? It actually can be the case that when you're sharing, you have the insights. And so, and it also says, give all to have all in A Course in Miracles. So I think that's something that one can relate to in art and in acting and in directing and all these things. You are giving all to all.
Instead of like my sister says, when you try to take it all, you lose it all. Instead of giving all, people try to take it all instead of, trying to give it. And then they lose it. They lose it all.
Oh, you can't be someone else, right? So either you come to terms with who you are, or you're going to be unhappy for the rest of your life, right? And so if it takes a whole life, some people think it takes many lifetimes to come to terms with who you are and to remember who you are. It doesn't matter what your story is to describe how you get there. You will get there at some point because it simply is impossible to go away from yourself. That's like in A Course in Miracles, it also says thoughts never leave their source. Right? So you can project all kinds of thoughts and think it's going somewhere else, but it never left. So either you change your mind or you're going to be left with those thoughts, right? They're going to be there. They haven't left you until you've changed your mind and are having other thoughts.
Exactly, and it's hard sometimes to break through some of those barriers. It seems I have issues that I'm still dealing with that I know there's for some reason it's like stuck like Velcro to my thinking or to my body or something. But yeah, when I'm faced with some really bad situation, I just always go back to only love is real. Only love is real. Only love is real. And then it helps me. And so, but finally, it's taken me, I don't know how many years, 5 years I've been studying Course in Miracles. Um, and it's finally I'm letting go of some of those really stubborn thought patterns or emotional thought patterns too. So, yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other questions for me?
Well, let's see. What is your favorite story that you have written, and why is it so important to you?
Well, I only have 2 books. A children's book that we wrote for our nephew when he was 6, and now he's almost 40, I think. And then so we used it as our template. How do we publish a book independently? And then I have my novel. But really some of the things that I've written on my blog are the most uh, profound to me because when I'm writing my blog, I'm writing my aha moments. And so this recent aha moment about, oh, emotions are the things, unhealed emotions are the things that have caused all the problems in the world. And if everybody was emotionally intelligent and empathetic, then we wouldn't have so many problems in the world. Or if almost everybody was, I'm not sure. There are going to be people who are just not going to choose to be emotionally intelligent and empathetic or compassionate. But if we had more people who were that way, then some of these terrible problems that we're facing would probably sort of just dissolve and disappear. That's just that's just the way I see it right now. Who knows what new insights I will gain as I go along. But does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think another aspect of that in A Course in Miracles, they speak of the unconscious guilt, and I think that's according to A Course in Miracles, that is the source of all these emotions that are negative and unpleasant and so on. And so when you actually allow them to surface and to show their so-called ugly head, if you think it is ugly, right, is that you can actually perhaps discover that it's guilt and that the guilt wasn't necessary in the first place, because the Course in Miracles says we are innocent, we are holy, and this never happened, right? It's all errors can be corrected. There's nothing that cannot be corrected. So even the past changes because of a change of mind. And I think that is something that storytellers know very well. the moment their thinking changes, they write a whole different story. They will describe their life in a different way, and I think if you're aware of that, that is also very helpful.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you read an author who's written a lot of books, you can see the evolution of who they are as you go along with the books. Um, or, or, I mean, there are people who've written several memoirs, and it's the evolution of their thinking and feeling and their healing process. And, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're getting these insights in order to be able to go deeper, right? And so sharing it with the people who read your blogs or in whatever way you are allows you to move to the next insight when it's there, right? And to be able to share that. Because many people, think, okay, if I share my best idea now, then I won't have an idea afterwards, and my best idea will be gone forever, right? And the truth is, or at least the way A Course in Miracles says, is what you share is what you're able to keep, right? If you don't share it, you're not able to keep it. So it's actually the opposite of what some people think will happen. And you get more insights because of sharing your insights and not less.
I I have learned so much from my students. So we're watching a movie, and I'll ask them what they think about it, and somebody will say something really profound, and it's like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way before." Or when I was forced to teach English for a while, and I mean, I loved that new school district. It was so much less toxic, but I wanted to teach theater, but when we were reading the stories and I would ask the students what they thought about it, sometimes they would come up with these profound things. And I would tell them, "Oh, wow, I never thought of it that way before. That was really great." And, it was mostly students who were of Mexican descent, and they weren't used to sharing their feelings or their thoughts. It took me a while during the school year to get them to talk out loud about what they thought about the story. But then when they did, they had these really great ideas. So yeah, I love what Ted Lasso says, "Be curious, not judgmental," because that's how you learn things, is listening to other people and being curious about their lives. And that's why I started the podcast Story Power, because I wanted to hear about other people's lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also get to hear other people's stories on my podcast, so this is very great. And I think it's so powerful. It simply is. And I've decided to share my story on other people's podcasts. So I think that's really, really, really powerful. And I think one thing you could share is, how did you help people who are reluctant to share, because I think that's also a very important part of teaching theater and arts, is to inspire students to feel safe sharing their ideas, their feelings, their thoughts, and showing their emotions when they're playing roles and this and that.
Well, this might sound arrogant, but I learned it from my dad. I just have this way about me, and my dad had it too, where he would just ask him a question and then he would just wait, and and as if he was really interested, because a lot of times, people will ask you a question and then they don't stop to listen to what you have to say. They go on with what they're talking about. And so leaving space, that was a hard skill to learn. When I'd ask a question, to just let it be silent for a while so they could think about their answer. And, um, and, I also would say, I really want to know what you have to say because what you might have some insight about the story that I don't have. And so, that kind of thing. And then I have been told by my students at both high schools that I taught at and also college that I just have this personality that is open and accepting. And so it was so easy for them to, talk. It was like I wasn't going to cut them off.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the beautiful qualities of a teacher of God in the Manual for Teachers is that patience is so important. So yeah, so patience, it also says he can be patient who is certain of the outcome. So I think that you were certain that an answer would come. You were willing to give it time. And that alone is a huge virtue, right? And to give people space to share. And that's something that I'm very, very happy to be able to do with this podcast.
Yeah, that's why I do it too. That's why I'm a podcaster too, because I love listening to other people's stories. I've always loved that. And maybe it's just because, you know, of that whole experience of sharing stories with my family and us discussing them. And mom and dad always wanted to hear our point of view. I had the cool parents. All my high school friends and our friends at church. We'd come home after church and have we'd invite them, and mom would go, "Okay, we have to stop at the store and get some more food." She never said, "Oh no, they can't come. We don't have enough food." And then when we'd sit around the table, they'd ask questions burning questions that they wanted to know the answer to, but their parents were not willing to talk about. And my mom and dad were willing to talk to them about it. And so I had more than one friend say, "Man, you got cool parents. You have cool parents." And so, being open yeah, I'm not sure that there are a lot of people who are just really super open and curious all the time. And sometimes people are suspicious of those people. Well, what is their ulterior motive? There's no ulterior motive. They just want to know. They're just curious.
Yeah, some people like to use the story of Momo by Michael Ende to describe this listening. I don't know if you know the story, but it's really, Momo is this girl, and she has this amazing ability to listen to her friends, to people, and she has this abundant imagination. So she can really think up anything, right? And she's willing to listen. There's this character in the story. He's a tour guide, and he always makes up a story about the sights that people see. So every time it's something else, right? It's a whole different story. Every tour is unique. And as far as I can understand, Momo would never judge this tour guide and say he's lying, right? No, it's just fantastic. These stories are great and it's so beautiful and I love them, right? Something like that, I think, would be her reaction. It's not said in the story, but it's the way Michael Ende describes the character and how much Momo loves him and all the other characters, right? There's these silent characters who are never speaking much, but when they speak, it's very profound, right? Like there's this character who sweeps the streets, right? He cleans the streets, and he does it one sweep at a time, right? And that's good enough for him, right? He's not thinking about, oh, it's so long or this is so this. It's a lot of teaching about being present, I think, in that character. So I really, really appreciate your love for stories. And I think that's one of the stories that is very inspiring, and there's many, many more.
That sounds like a fun story. Okay, I'm gonna have to write that down. Momo. I love it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm always looking for new stories to read. My to be read list is super long because I started reading the stories of the writers that I talk to. And oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Uh, I'm not gonna be able to keep up, I don't think, but I like to read at least a little bit of what they've written if I can before I interview them. Or sometimes I'll read after because some of them the book hasn't come out yet. And then I will give them feedback and I'll say, "Oh man, what a great book," or "I enjoyed that so much," and "When's your next one coming out?" That's how I kind of stay connected to some of my podcast guests is to read their books and then talk to them about them, email back and forth about them. So yeah, I'm always. It feels every day like I want to consume some sort of stories. It might be a TV show or a movie, or I need to read every day. I have to read something every day. And I'm to the point now where if a book doesn't grab me, I set it aside. I used to be a like compulsive finisher, even if I didn't like the book or if the book didn't speak to me. But now I'm not like that. I only read the books that really grab my attention. And it's kind of the same with movies and television. We Barry and I started, my husband, and I started watching some series were just recent streamers, and we watched two, maybe one or two episodes, and then we went, nah, that's not for us, and we didn't go back to it. Um, so, yeah, I only consume the stories that mean something to me, or teach me something, or that make me feel something.
I think that's a good lesson to have learned because we tend, like you said, at all costs to finish things or to want to get things to go through the whole process, right? But sometimes it would be smart to leave in the middle, like you said. That's probably a topic of emotional intelligence, as you said, and knowing who you are and what's important to you and what your values are, and being able to stick up for them.
Right, yeah, and I mean, there have been books that I have finished reading that were not very pleasant to read, like I was talking with, uh, the podcast episode that's going to air next Wednesday. He and I were talking about The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling, and it's not a pleasant book. There aren't very many likable characters, and it's about the divide between the middle class people in this small English town and the really poor people, and how the middle class people just look down on them. But I'm glad that I finished that book because it was a very important viewpoint into the lives of the people who were poor and how they were kept down by the system or by the people's attitudes in the town, and how they weren't helped out of this cycle of poverty, and why they sold drugs because they needed money, or why they consumed them because they were so felt so desolate, or why they did other things that they did. And yeah, so occasionally I will finish a book that I'm just like, oh, so I'm slogging through. But I'm glad that I read that one because it was a good perspective about, we don't really take the time to try to understand sometimes other people's lives and why they do what they do. And that's the thing that I learned from theater was you need to take the time to understand why those people are why did those people choose to be in a gang, or why, you know, whatever it is, whatever it is. You need to try to see people's lives in a new way instead of the old. I heard somebody on our vacation say, "Oh, people just don't want to work," because we were in this cafe and they were short staffed. And, "Oh, people just don't want to work." Well, yes, they want to work, but they don't want to work for wages anymore. That's the way it's going in our country. People are just rebelling and saying, "No, I'm not going to take your job when you don't pay me enough to live on, uh, live my life comfortably." And so I kind of wanted to turn around and say that to her, but then I thought, no, 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 because I don't want to start an argument in the cafe. But yeah, that kind of thing. I just think that we need to look at people's lives and try to understand what they're going through.
Yeah, and that comes back to stories, right? I mean, they're so useful tools to be able to shift perspectives.
So, do you have anything else you want to talk about or ask me?
Sure. Let's see. Let's go into the writing and people who are writing. I'm sure you've supported so many writers as you described it, alone with your podcast and with other things. What how do the what have you drawn from their descriptions of what motivates them to actually write, to actually get these things on paper, get them published, and so on and so forth, go through all those processes that are necessary? What is the main motive, or what are some of the motives, and how do they move through those processes, and how do you, I think you're, what I understand from you, one of your main supports is by listening to them, but you may have some other ways that you support them that you'd like to describe here.
Well, one of the ways I support them is through having them be my guest. And then I share the podcast episode on my social media. And unfortunately, I have way too much social media. I can't keep up with all of them. So I pick like four or five that share their books. And then when I finish the book, I rate it. If I've purchased it, I give it a rating, and a little review on Goodreads. Um, I don't always do it. Sometimes I do it on Amazon as well if I've purchased it through Amazon. I don't always purchase through them. Sometimes I purchase through the Apple bookstore. But yeah, so I do that. But also, just listening to their processes, you know, they have, it's like they have this well of stories inside them that they just need to share. And I have that too in a way, but I realize that I am not ever going to be someone who's going to write, 50 books from now until I die. I probably will write, maybe I'll finish the sequel to the one that I wrote, that I published in 2017. But I've had difficulty with it. And that's another thing that I have found from writers is sometimes they know that there's something that they need to write, but it's like they can't quite grasp it, yet. And so they have to wait. And that's sort of how it's been with me, because I started writing the book in 2017. It's a sequel to the first one. And the Morgan in the past, the great three times great grandmother, gets involved in the suffrage movement. And Jenna in the present didn't have anything to do in 2014. There was nothing going on in the women's movement in 2014. So I wrote most of Morgan's story, and then I was sitting around kind of, well, what am I going to do with Jenna in the present? And then when the Harvey Weinstein thing happened, oh, okay, now I've got something to write. So I wrote some more, and then COVID hit, and it was like, do I include that in the story? I'm not quite sure. And so, and some of the things that have happened recently, so I'm kind of struggling with what do I include, what do I not include? And I've heard other authors talk about that um, you know, they feel like their story needs to go a certain way, but it's not quite gelling yet. And then other authors, they don't have that problem at all. So it probably just depends on the author, uh, the writer, and their process for a particular story. Some stories just flow and other ones don't.
Is one of the topics what they're passionate about? Is that what flows more, or what would you say?
Yeah, probably. That's probably true. Although there's an author that I love her books, and she writes fantasy, and she's got two books in the series, and there's a third one coming. But life things have gotten in the way for her. She moved. She may have even changed jobs again. So sometimes stuff like that gets in the way. She has a certain amount of it written, but um, maybe she got stuck, or something, life got in the way again. And so eventually she will have that. She's written other books. She has three in this series, but she's written other books as well that I've read. But writing is not, I mean, people think, oh, just sit down and start writing and the story will come to you. And no, it's not always like that. There are people who are just so passionate about certain topics and they can write about them, uh, let it flow. And another thing is discipline. I have a difficult time because I wear so many hats. Uh, I have a difficult time sitting down every day and writing on my novel. Part of it is I'm not quite sure where it's going, and part of it is I just need to sit down and just write, because if I sat down and just write, it might come to me. So I have to I have to get back into the habit of setting aside a certain amount, like a half an hour every day, to just work on my novel, and then go work on getting my next podcast recording ready to schedule, or work on my blog. And now I'm creating an online course. I always add things to I don't know what it is about me, but I always have these fun new creative projects that I want to do. But yeah, so I'm learning to create an online course, and it's about story and how stories can teach us to be empathetic and compassionate and all the things that we've talked about, and learn emotional intelligence and critical thinking. That's what the course is going to be about. But yeah, so that's once I get that going, that will just keep running, because it'll be filmed, and I may have sessions with class students in the class periodically, live sessions, but mostly that will be up and running, and I won't have to think about that every day. So yeah, it's different for every writer, really. I can't say that there's one template for any writer. Sometimes their life gets in the way, sometimes they're they're stuck, sometimes it flows well.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes some processes need to happen before they can continue. Just, because as the story continues, it might need a new insight in order to continue, and the author might need some time to get to that insight before they can continue with the book. So yeah, there's many things.
Yeah, I think that might be part of what's going on with me in this book. I need to get to a certain uh, way of thinking or feeling or something to help the character in the present. The past stuff is always really easy for me to write. So maybe I should be writing historical fiction or fantasy or something. But the present, what's going on in the present, I have to think about, well, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about, some of the political stuff that's going on? And then transfer that to the character. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am right now with my book. Do you have anything else you want to know?
Well, there's so much, but anyways, we'll be wrapping up soon, so don't worry. But yes, there's so much I could ask. I will ask about I'll make a little comment about the present character, because I think one of the things that is why the present can be more demand more of you is because it's so close to you. It's what you are, you're going through it, and yet you need to separate what your experience to what the character is experiencing and what they are going through. So maybe you might need to use, a tool like a fictional present that is not exactly the present that we're going through, but does tell the story of the emotions and the feelings that are happening there.
Yeah, I've thought of that too. I've thought that maybe I just need to make a fictional, more similar but fictional present. So I've changed names of like political figures and stuff like that. Yeah, I may include a um, something about a pandemic kind of situation, but I don't know. I'm still kind of letting it percolate on the back burner of my brain. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, even that percolating can be really exciting. So, many things, they take time, and it's being thought about even when you're not aware of it. And sometimes you get glimpses of what's being thought about. And it's like, it's like a source of power that you're tapping into because it's being thought about, I think. I've felt that when a story wants to be told and it's not yet there, that can be a source of power because you realize something exciting is happening, right? And I'm part of it.
Ex- Exactly. Yes, that's so true. Yeah, because I mean, this is an exciting time. That's how I see it. Oh yeah, there's all this upheaval, and sometimes, since I'm a highly sensitive person, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, can't we just have a break for one day? But on the other hand, uh, I see signs of so much great change happening, and so yeah, the Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times is happening to us right now.
I think Terry Pratchett has a book that's called Interesting Times, if I'm not mistaken. So, and he's an author of humor, right? Humorous books, fantasy, science fiction mixture, right? Because it's in space, but it's yet fantasy with magic and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think that's really important, that that aspect, right, of the humor that you were putting into it. Okay, interesting times.
Yes, but I always try to seek out the positive things that are happening. And it seems like there are people who are more like maybe it's just because I'm trying to observe it, but there's more compassion in the world. There's more uh, I see videos of dads who are really taking the time to be a father and to be there for their children. We just had a family reunion, and one of my niece's husbands, he didn't say this to me, but he said it to my sister, that when my wife and I got pregnant, I made the decision that even if I'm dead tired at the end of the day, I'll touch the door frame and I'll say, I have the energy to be there for my child. And he does that. I mean, he's a really great dad. So, and I've seen that in other dads. And, I grew up with a really great dad who was like that. My parents went to all of our school activities, um, for all four of us. And even though, my dad coached my brother's little league team, or maybe it was his school team, and he worked, 70 miles away from where we lived. So that was a long drive, but, uh, in the 50s and 60s, fathers weren't that it wasn't as big a deal for fathers to be there for their kids like my dad was with us. They'd go to work and they came home and they think they'd done their job. They provided for the family. And they didn't maybe have as much interaction with their children as nowadays. I see fathers really taking the time to be there for their kids, and that's really important. That's just one little thing that I've noticed that is so going in the right direction. So,
Yeah, thank you for that example. Yeah. So now I'd like to wrap up. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share? And once you've done that, how can one reach you? And of course, we'll put it in the show notes afterwards, right? You'll give me the links and we'll put it there. So, yeah.
well, no, I think this has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot. People can find my blog. Well, actually, my books are available on my website, my blog, my podcast with the show notes at Sage Woman Chronicles on WordPress. And the address is sagewomanchronicles.life. So you can also contact me through there. There's a contact tab. But story power, no, let's see, my email address is sagewoman@story-power.life. So that's my email address if people want to email me. Uh, I'm on LinkedIn, Goodreads, Instagram, Facebook, and I have different names for different for them. But yeah, they can find me. I don't know if I have links for all of those on my website, but I think I do. And I'm on Podmatch. Um, People can. All my links are on Podmatch if they want to find me there. But you have to join Podmatch to get them. But I think most of my links are on my website as well. So if they want to find me on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me spontaneously because I had some time that I can be flexible with. We could do this so quickly because the podcast is fully booked till the end of September at the moment, the regular times. So when I have openings where I have a little more space, I can do some extra episodes like now. So this is great. Yeah, and I'm so thankful you're here. Thank you for everyone listening. Please review the podcast, subscribe to it, let people know about it. And yeah, so more people can profit from these wonderful stories and sharings and offerings that so many of our siblings are providing us with through this venue and through other venues. So please profit from it. So thank you so much, and till next time.